it's just fascinating to me the resiliency that people had. 75% of the people that we talk to grew up with no power, with
Mm,
no
right,
electricity,
right.
half the time no running water, bathrooms outside if it's a rural area. And the one thing they all have in common is nobody complained. There's not one iota of complaining about it.
Right,
So I mean, my
right.
tolerance. I mean, this is
Uh,
like my tolerance level of young people complaining about stuff is extremely
Low.
shallow. Yeah, yeah. So it.
Hello, everyone. This is Ron Roel, the host of 45 Forward. We all love good storytellers, and the best storytellers are the ones with the most to tell. America's seniors, who have already lived long lives. But our older generations often don't get a chance to tell their stories. In fact, they're not even asked. In today's episode, I'll be talking with Jack York, whose mission is to change all that. Jack has been immersed in the senior living world for more than 25 years, and he is the founder and chief storyteller of Tailgate. Now he spends his days crisscrossing the country, capturing the amazing, often untold personal stories of seniors, including those of our oldest old, 100-year-olds, our nation's centenarians, through a project he calls Vintage Voices. The story of Jack and Tailgate is an amazing, heartfelt story in itself, and today I'm privileged to share this story with you. So now let's meet Jack York. Jack, welcome to the show.
All right, thanks, Ron, for having me on. I love your whole tagline of making the second half of life better than the first. That's awesome.
Yeah, and you've done that. You've had multiple parts of your life, but so let's start with that a little bit, Jack. So give us during the course of the our conversation, we'll talk about a lot of your different pivots, but just give us a sense. And I know you started out in the tech industry, you know, I guess selling semiconductors, and then you made a dramatic shift. So tell us about that beginning and a bit about your origin story.
I had a fairly conventional, I guess, corporate climbing life that I was
Mm-hmm.
in my mid 20s started working in the Silicon Valley for a company called Siliconics that was in as you said in the semiconductor industry and people in the senior living world have assumed I'm a tech guy, but I was just a good sales and marketing guy
Yeah.
in that technology world, and just never thinking of it as it was a good career. You check all the boxes of what you're supposed to be doing, great family and kids and all that stuff, and never thinking of it as a business. A really good friend of mine, Leslie Sweeney,
Mm-hmm.
in 1998. All of a sudden,
Wow.
that's a long time ago. She had the idea to donate some computers to a local assisted living community in California, and again, it was never an idea for a business. It was just she just noticed that it looked like a lot of the people in this community that she was pretty close to geographically that were pretty lonely, or they just seemed kind of bored.
Mm-hmm.
And so we just donated some computers. She worked with the residents for a year, and it was just kind of a cool thing to do. And then a very spiritual thing happened that my mom, we were having an 80th surprise birthday party for
Oh,
my
wow.
mom
Mm-hmm.
in 1998, and towards the end of the party she started not feeling a little, just as the party was winding down she was getting a little dizzy, so we just out of precautionary call an ambulance. They come out and they look at her, and they're not overly concerned, but thought, well, maybe we should take her to the hospital just to be safe. And it turned out that she this is such a joyful story, but it sounds so sad when you say it, that she wound up having a massive stroke
Mm.
in the ambulance on the way to the hospital, and died the next morning. And but it was her spirit was telling me to do something with my
Mm.
life that had purpose and had meaning, and it was kind of her last gift to me. And so without having any any idea, I mean, I'd worked for the same company for almost 15, 16 years, so I just completely jumped off a cliff to start a company called It's Never Too Late with Leslie and my brother Tom. And had no, usually people start companies, they have some semblance of a a skill set in whatever that industry
Uh-huh.
is. We had no idea on any level of what we were doing, which in some ways was bad and maybe in some ways was good. But that was the whole inception of IN2L, and which was all about bringing technology to older adults, and that's kind of how the whole major pivot happened, and how everything else since then has followed.
Yeah. So then you decided that on the name is never too late with this. Is that for you or for?
Yeah, it's never too late. It was because it was all about it was all about just it's 1999, so the whole computing, Windows had just been out for a while. I mean, the whole computing world in general was just starting, much less much less older adults, much less nursing homes, much less dementia. I mean, we were ahead of the curve on pretty much every level, but it was just, with just observationally is really kind of how the whole idea started. Observationally, you go into a senior living community and you'd see these, and none of this is meant to say anything demeaning about the incredibly dedicated staff that work in senior living, but you go back to 1999, and you have these people that are, the residents that are, you know, teachers and welders and doctors and lawyers and whatever the heck their life was. They had lived completely rich lives, and you'd look at at what then was called activity programming, and it was just so demeaning to people that had lived such full lives. And again, it's not at all a reflection of the people that work in the industry. They just didn't have any tools. So, you'd have rooms full of old VHS tapes, and you're just trying to keep people. It was there was just nothing. It was nothing really engaging about it, and it just seemed like, no, there's got to be a better way to do this, and that's just kind of how it started. And the fact that we didn't know the industry, the fact that we didn't know that we didn't know what we were doing, it made us just ask questions of people, and there were so many people along the road that really helped guide the product development. They saw that our hearts were in the right place, and it was just really just kind of an organic beginning to a company in an industry that was starting to look at computing, but only through the lens of medical records and clinical applications. So we were, you go to a conference, we were like out in left field doing all this crazy stuff. So we were way ahead of the curve, and like I said, it was probably to our benefit that we had no idea what we were talking about.
Yeah. Well, sometimes you're right. Sometimes it's good not to know.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
But yeah, and so of course I love your story because my show is 45 forward. And
Yeah,
it it
right, right,
focus
right.
it focuses on the fact that it is never too late, and many of my guests, Jack, have had multiple careers, after middle age, and I think that's the point of it, is that you can keep growing and learning things. And I mean, we've gone through some tremendous changes. I mean, as I think back to my early days as a writer, as a journalist, I'm like a little stunned. I'm like, okay, so we were using typewriters, and I was making copies using carbon paper. And I was,
Yeah, no, it
things that
is.
people.
It's so. I want to do one of my many off the wall ideas. I'd love to do some kind of a contest of 25-year-olds to give them a Street and Smith's map guide, and
Hmm.
tell them how, and they kind of leave their cell phone at home and like drive from, you give them an address and they got to figure out how to get there. I mean,
Yeah,
it's there's that's what's, and obviously we're going to get into the 100-year-olds. You get into the world of folks that are centenarians, and you get into slide rules, and
sure.
it's just kind of one step back, but it's the same thing. It's just people's aversion to change and doing things differently, and kind of being on the edge to do it.
Right. Yeah. So we'll talk about a lot of things, but I want to just talk a little bit more about it's never too late, which now I guess is life loop, right? That's yeah, and about, so just a little bit about how you do this. How do you go into communities? What sort of things do you do with them, and how do you, because you do a lot of things, yeah.
It's kind of like IN2L, and it's now, to my to my delight, it's become a much more sophisticated, broader product. It's part of a company called LifeLoop, and
Mm-hmm.
it was, but like I said before, the IN2L, the conception was it was just trying to bring to older adults that did not, kind of a combination of, they didn't have a lot of computer experience,
Mm-hmm.
but they also were dealing with different levels of physical or cognitive decline. How do you bring them the
Mm-hmm.
same kind of things that we get used to with the computer? It really, I don't think it was that 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 complicated of an idea.
Mm-hmm.
Just through, we were way ahead of the curve with touchscreen, so it's touchscreen
Mm-hmm.
technology, and to try to let people be able to get to, without having to really know how to use a computer, that just through the touchscreen and well laid out content, they could get to just sections based of travel and spirituality and
Mm-hmm.
games and whatever they want. It just whatever, what do we do? We want to listen to music. We want to. I always use the analogy. I'm a big Springsteen guy,
Mm-hmm.
and it's not like when I hit 80, I'm gonna all of a sudden want the Carpenters. We all have our passions
Right. Right.
that our bodies change. We may change a little physically or cognitively. We don't lose the thirst to stay connected and engaged with things that are meaningful. So I and 2O was just all about trying to bring that, what was relevant to that person, and make it easy either for them to get to individually or for an activity professional to be able to guide their way to the content in a group context. And it took forever to take off. The first 10 years of the company was more just trying to get people to open up to the ideas of computers and residents and dementia, more than you're selling against a competitor. It was just trying to change
Yeah.
mindsets.
Yeah.
And I'm super proud of the fact that I think we helped did we helped move the needle of just kind of that common sense
Yeah.
equation that, everybody should have access to the same kind of things that we take for granted with technology.
Yeah, and I love this approach because I mean it relates to actually who's using it and why are they using it. So, I've been involved, with ARP and a lot of advocacy groups for seniors, and people talk, well, how do we teach people, seniors how to use technology? Well, the same when we teach anybody about things like why is this relevant to you? Why would you use it? What do you need it for? Not just, oh well, I'll learn how to use all these things and programs and so forth. So you're just the fact that it's well, in some way it's customer driven. You're looking at who is the customer here. It's it's the senior and why do they need it, and also, breaking through this myth of like, oh well, no, seniors, they can't use it. They're used to paper and pencils and stuff like that. And no, but you needed your approach of really paying attention to them.
In the early days, and this is obviously dramatically changed, but in the early days, and this is, it kind of reminds me, it reminds me so viscerally of a moment I had when I was a kid, and or where I was in a teenager,
Mm-hmm.
late teens, early 20s, I think, that I was working for my dad, and my dad was a civil engineer,
Mm.
and I remember this guy coming in with a Texas Instrument computer, and my dad's a total slide rule guy, and growing up with that, and he was so resistant to this calculator, even though it was so. I'm just sitting there looking at it from the outside, go, Dad, that seems to be a lot easier than that thing that you have. And I think a lot of the early resistance to IN2L, and it was almost subconscious, I think, but a person that had done a job the certain way for 20 years,
Right.
all of a sudden here's this guy showing up that has no knowledge of senior living and no knowledge of the intricacies of aging and dementia, just saying, it's a lot easier just to touch this. If you got a resident who you've built this activity about going to France, and the person wants to go to Germany, instead of having to completely redo your whole day, just touch this button instead of that button. It's a heck of a lot easier than all the
Right.
work you've done. But there was such resistance because it was just a different way for people to do their job. And so you like anything else, you have people that are willing to take a risk, a little bit of early adopters, a whole bunch of people that were so beneficial to us early on, and it took a lot of years, but it ultimately wound up being, succeeding beyond my wildest dreams.
Right.
And
Yeah.
of Leslie and my, unfortunately, my brother died, the other
Mm.
founder, early on, so it was a tough first 10 years of the company, but wound up being, like I said, very successful.
Yeah, but 10 years. I mean, so persistence is a lot of it too. I mean, nobody likes change.
It's funny. I don't want to get off on a tangent, but a lot of why I talk a lot to people, to young people that are entrepreneurs starting businesses,
Hmm.
and as much as anything else, the reason that I-N2L succeeded was when I was 25, I started saving 10 between 10 and 20%. I would save
Mm.
of what I made and put it into no load mutual funds, and just every month put money in every month. And I'm 40, and it got too close to $1 million, and that's what we used to launch I-N2L. Every dime went away, but I didn't have to go look for, until about 10 years later, I didn't have to go look for any other capital, and didn't have to answer anybody else. So I'm a firm believer. I've been more the like Jimmy Stewart model
Oh.
of starting a company, but half the people I talk to don't even know who Jimmy Stewart is. So I need to come up with a new analogy. But
Right.
it was, I think part of it just growing up with depression era parents that,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
you just, or you're conservative and you save money, and that's kind of how the whole thing happened from a
Right.
financial standpoint.
Right. Right. Great. Okay. So we're going to take a quick break, Jack. Folks, when we come back, we'll be talking much more with Jack York, the founder of Tailgate. So don't go anywhere.
Are you caring for an aging loved one? It can feel overwhelming, but you don't have to do it alone. Ron's book, The Caregiving Navigator, is a step by step guide designed to help you plan, prepare, and provide compassionate care with confidence. From organizing family conversations to navigating long term care and finding support for yourself, the caregiver, it's all here. Find the Caregiving Navigator now on Amazon and take the first step toward peace of mind.
Welcome back, folks, to 45 Forward. This is your host, Ron Roel. We're talking today with Jack York, the founder of Tailgate, whose mission is to capture and tell the stories of our best storytellers, America's seniors. So before the break, we were talking about Jack's earlier career with It's Never Too Late, um, and how I wanted to now get into how you developed and moved into Tailgate. How did this transition take place?
Yeah, so as I-N2L got bigger, one of the, I did a lot. I could spend a lot of time talking about mistakes that I made, and as any entrepreneur can tell you that. But the one thing I did, I think, do well was I was very self-aware of what I was good at, and what I was not good at. And I think I was a
Mm-hmm.
good CEO for a company of 10, 15, 20 people. As I-N2L got larger, and more successful, I knew that I wasn't the right CEO to kind of take it to the next level. I
Mm.
didn't I didn't lose the passion for the product, but it just takes a different skill set to kind
Mm-hmm.
of go from point B to point C. And I think a lot of people, their egos get in the way of letting go a little bit. And so as in the year before COVID, I was trying to do some things that were more, almost more kind of public. And I was still passionate, still working for I-N2L, but I wanted to kind of get out of the operational role and just do more, really just more out in the field at the senior living communities, and this
Right.
then. And so we came up with the idea. I turned 60. This is 5.5 years ago. I turned 60, and I-N2L turned 20,
Hmm.
and so we invented this thing called the 60/20 tour, that I drove around in a van with GoPro cameras, which is what I'm doing now. We'll get to that later.
All right.
But it was really like carpool karaoke. We couldn't call it that from a licensing standpoint, so we called it cruising and crooning. but we would just go to communities, and we would get residents to drive around, drive around the neighborhood with me, and we'd sing songs, and just just have really kind of a just wherever the conversation would go. And it was the first time, my IN2L career. Not that this is a bad thing, but I would, I'd lug in a demo unit, and I'm trying to talk to the executive
Mm-hmm.
director and the therapists and the activity world, trying to sell the product and show what it was, say hello to the residents, but I didn't really interact with them. And then,
Right.
then you leave and you go to the next community. And all of a sudden with this 60/20 tour, it was really the first time that I really had more deeper relation or conversations with the residents, and it was like, God, these people are just so cool,
Hmm.
and they're so thirsty to be heard. And that was kind of the it just kind of planted a seed of there's got to be a bigger and better way to do this. And then when COVID hit, it was it was kind of odd because everything IN2L was about was really so ideal for COVID, because it was all about trying to connect residents to the outside world, to their families, to to what mattered to them.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so just in blunt capitalistic terms, COVID probably tripled the valuation of IN2L, and all of a sudden a lot of private equity companies were interested in it. It really wasn't that we were necessarily looking to sell the company, but it's kind of, it was like, well, maybe this is the right time to do that.
Mm-hmm.
And
Mm-hmm.
so we were acquired through a private equity company. It became part of a company, LifeLoop, and I'm still involved with it. I love what it's turned into. Like I said earlier on, it's the infusion of capital and of LifeLoop has allowed the product to become a lot broader, and it's now
Mm-hmm.
tied into AI and doing all. I mean, it's
Wow.
totally thriving, but that allowed me to, but I never lost the passion for IN2L, but I really felt like, almost like when I started IN2L, it sounds kind of hokey, but it's true that it really felt like a calling to me,
Mm-hmm.
when I just saw the isolation and how
Right.
technology was just leaving people behind. I just felt the same way. I had kind of the same feeling with Tailgate, that, or just in general, that just a calling to do a deeper job of trying to capture the stories of some of these folks. And so the initial launch of Tailgate was a 42-foot trailer
Mm-hmm.
that we had, and that's kind of how the name Tailgate came, because it was
Oh, okay.
it's spelled TALE because you're
Right.
capturing stories. But it was initially a lot of tailgate parties that we had this 42-foot trailer that we'd bring all over the country, and we built a recording studio inside the trailer. And so we'd show up at a community and have a whole day of activities and a tailgate party, and then we'd be capturing stories on the inside. And I fell in love with doing it, but I also felt like the 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 sanctity of capturing the stories
Mm-hmm.
was getting lost in this big party, and it really
Okay.
wasn't all about the party. And it was also, the other practical side of it is that everybody else in the company like had lives back at home, and they
Right.
wanted. I was pretty comfortable being on the road all the time, and so there was a
Mm.
little bit of like, what's a different way to do this. And so that's kind of what it's evolved to now. But that's how it started, and it was the same. I mean, really, the patron saint of me is probably Leonardo DiCaprio in Catch Me If You Can, because now
Uh-huh.
I'm a documentary film producer, and before I was a tech entrepreneur, both of which I had absolutely no business doing. But
Mm-hmm.
you just jump in and figure stuff out, and all of a sudden you start making it work.
Yeah. So, did you have a moment when you just really realized, like, wow, people really have a thirst to tell stories, and as you've told me before, sort of uplifting stories, or stories of their lives, and no one was asking them. Was there sort of an epiphany?
Part of it for me, this is also going back to the idea of starting it, is that when I was a kid, I, and I was talking about this before with my dad, and like the latter part of high school, early part of college, I worked for my dad, and in the summers, and so we would drive every day back and forth. We would drive about 30 minutes both ways.
Mm-hmm.
And after he died, it kind of, it's the classic story that you find out these things that your parents did after they died. So with my dad, I knew about I knew he had been a part of World War II. I knew, just very rudimentary about what he did. And then I found out after he died all this really, incredibly cool stuff that he did that
Mm-hmm.
I sat there in the car with him, and not one, I asked, we'd talk all day about the Dodgers, about
Mm-hmm.
Nebraska Cornhusker football, about the stuff that was, we the father-son conversations. But I never asked him, what was it like being a 20-year-old
Mm-hmm.
kid with a civil engineering degree, and all of a sudden you're on a plane going to India to build landing strips in this thing called the Burma Road. And so that always bothered me. And so I
Mm-hmm.
think part of the, almost my subconsciousness with Tailgate is that every person's story we capture is kind of almost a subconscious tribute to my father, whose story, I
Mm-hmm.
never did capture. But, going back to your question, I don't think it was like a moment. It was like a daily occurrence. Well,
Mm-hmm.
actually, you know what? As I think about it, maybe there was, I would say, a moment. There was two or three times where people would come up to me after an interview
Mm-hmm.
and say how much it meant to them. And one
Mm-hmm.
guy in particular, it's funny, I haven't thought about this forever, and just your question triggered it for me. I was at a really cool community called CC Young outside of Dallas, Texas,
Mm-hmm.
and did the interview in the trailer. And this guy, I'm leaving the building, and we had
Mm-hmm.
spent maybe a half hour with four or five different residents. This guy was one of them, and this real, tall guy, and he kind of waves me to come upstairs. Beautiful community. He waves me to come upstairs to say goodbye to him, and I go up to him, and I'm just saying goodbye, and he looked me in the eye and just said, you made me feel relevant today,
Mm-hmm.
and I don't always feel relevant. And
Mm-hmm.
it hit me, just that comment hit me that, this is more important than maybe I'm thinking it is. And then
Mm-hmm.
I would hear people say, this has happened a lot. And when it first, when I first heard it, it made me feel really good. And as
Mm-hmm.
time has gone on, it's actually made me feel a little more sad than good. And that is
Mm.
people that have said that in the drives that we do, which we'll talk about in a few
Yeah,
minutes,
we'll do that.
but
Yeah.
you'll wind up driving somebody around, capturing their story, and the person again will tell you that it's the most meaningful thing that they've done in the last year.
Yeah.
And when I first heard that, it was, wow, that is really cool. And then it's just like, that's a sad thing
Yeah.
that they're not. And I think it's not that it's me, and it's not that it's fanfare. I just think that it's somebody is authentically taking the time to ask questions of somebody that's lived a full life
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
is rarely asked those questions.
Yeah. It's interesting, Jack, as you're talking, I'm thinking back to my childhood too. And also, I know we're now into Tailgate, but going back to life loop, to me, there is sort of a life loop to this. So, you think about being a kid, and what's the most important thing that for kids is for them to feel listened to, and the adults are in their own world doing this, and so there's this, I think, this longing, like, I just want to be listened to, and I think that sort of carries through a lot of life. So now you're at the end of your life loop, or further down the road, and again, you've got this full life, and no one's really listening. We're not. You and I have talked about this before. We're not a society of listeners. We're talkers, which is okay, but what people want frequently is to be listened to, because that what makes you relevant.
Yeah, it's talkers, and it's also, we're a society of just sucked into our little reality into a cell phone.
Mm-hmm.
And again, this is something we can talk about later, but it's a passion of mine is trying to put together isolation of the older adults paired with these high school students
Mm-hmm.
who are so, they have their own version of loneliness, which is
Right.
just, it's just wrapped in a different box. And and just looking at it, just what, and we can talk about that later
Yeah.
about some of the things that have really struck me as changes that I think, not so much changes, just I think things that senior living communities can do
Mm-hmm.
to enhance this whole issue, or bring to light this whole issue.
Yeah. Yeah. So, Jack, we're going to take another quick break, but folks, we have a lot more to talk about. So, don't go away. We'll be talking much more with Jack York, the founder of Tailgate, and now we're going to transition to his stories about how he actually collects these stories. So, we'll be right back.
Do you like what you're hearing? Well, we've got plenty more where that came from. Head over to 45forward.org, where you'll find a full archive of over 200 episodes of the 45 Forward podcast, all hosted by Ron. Each week, Ron talks with fascinating guests, experts, advocates, and everyday folks, sharing insights and stories to help you live a better, fuller life in your second half. We cover everything from health and caregiving to careers, relationships, and finding purpose, whatever helps you move forward with clarity and confidence. That's 45forward.org. Check it out and keep moving forward. 45 Forward.
Welcome back, folks, to 45 Forward. I'm Ron Roel, your host. Once again, we're talking with Jack York, the founder of Tailgate, and about his passion for telling the stories of seniors, who really is the backbone of our society and our culture. So, Jack, now, let's get into a little bit more about how you do this. Now, I know that about how you do your interviews. I've seen some of your interviews where you're actually interviewing folks in a car, which I found fascinating. It reminded me a little bit of that, that Jerry Seinfeld bit, coffee in the car with comedians,
Yeah, yeah,
But I like your version better.
yeah, yeah. Well, I mean, there's a couple like the tailgate. There's a couple different things that we're doing, and
Okay.
one of them is we do really cool documentaries. And why don't we can talk about that in a minute, and
Okay.
then we're also we have a great author in our staff. Her name's Aubrey Roden. She's writing a book about some of these people that we're meeting along the way. So I
Okay.
mean, everything we're generically doing is tied to just elevating aging, and as a second tier way, kind of elevating senior living, and trying to
Mm-hmm.
kind of
Mm-hmm.
tweak that. But as far as what a lot of people see is the vintage voices, what we call vintage voice. It's a partnership between Tailgate and a company called Dash Media that does great work with
Okay.
social media and senior living. And so that's where I do a lot of the interviews in the car. I think everybody who's a parent has experienced kind of how you can get your kids to say things in a car that you can have good conversation in a car. So there is something oddly comfortable about just talking while you're driving. So if you look at the channel we've put together
Mm-hmm.
with this partnership, this Vintage Voices, it's called Vintage Voices 100,
Right.
which you can see on Instagram and YouTube, TikTok, all that stuff. So,
Okay.
I guess we can get to that more of that in a minute. But in terms of just your question, I think it's just interesting to me. It's funny because people will say people will. I laugh my rear end off sometimes because people will say that they really appreciate my work, and they say it like how you would talk to somebody who's digging wells in Africa.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I've always been a history person. I've always
Mm-hmm.
very enjoyed history, and I'm fascinated to just see what happens from generation to generation. So for me, it's just curiosity to just try to put myself in that person's head of what their life was like. And then I think that people, they have a good radar of authenticity and they see that I'm authentic.
Right.
And the fact that I'm a stranger, I think, makes it a lot easier sometimes to open up. And so it's interesting, and this totally, I think this next comment fits with the whole premise of what you're doing, Ron, is that
Mm-hmm.
I honestly I never really felt, to be brutally honest, I never felt like I was a very good CEO at IN2L. I was a good sales guy, but I
Mm-hmm.
really wasn't a very good CEO. Uh, but I really feel like I'm good at interviewing,
Mm-hmm.
and I think it's to the point of your show, it's a skill set that I never would have ever thought that I had, that I don't even tap into till my early 60s.
Mm-hmm.
And it's turning out to be something I thoroughly enjoy. I think that I'm good at, and I've surrounded myself with the documentaries that we do, phenomenal team of editors and videographers that really make the conversations that we have come to life. But it's really I think what anybody's good at doing doesn't seem that hard. Like for me, I really enjoy public speaking and getting in front of groups of people and talk about these
Mm-hmm.
lessons I'm learning and this that and so like when you hear how the terror that public speaking strikes inside of people, I don't get it. But man, throw me a pipe wrench with a toilet overflowing, and that's when I get terrified. I
Right.
have no idea what to do. So I think, we all kind of have our mojo of what we do. But to me, I think, again, just going back to your question, it's just being genuinely curious about
Right.
a person's whatever the topic is, and then just shut up and let them run with it.
Yeah, I think you're right, Jack. I think people detect your curiosity. It's a genuine curiosity. You're just interested in their lives. You're listening to them, and I think especially with older people, they've lived a long time and they can pick up things. They can sense things, because their brain is assimilating a lot of experiences, and they can tell very quickly this guy is for real, and he's genuinely interested, and he's not threatening to me. He's not trying to coerce me, get something out of me. He's genuinely curious, and he wants to know what was my
Yeah,
life
like
like.
this guy. There's a guy in Iowa that worked for 45 years at General Mills and
Mm-hmm.
making cereal. And
Uh
I
huh.
just thought that was fascinating.
Right.
And like, it's easy to stereotype, like, what a that's kind of must have been kind of a boring job. But the guy starts talking about it, he was doing all kinds of stuff. That's his identity is General Mills and the stuff that he was doing to improve cereal. And from the outside, it could seem like a simple thing. To him, that was his life for
Mm-hmm.
45 years. And you want to honor it and let him talk about it. And the guy hadn't talked about it for probably, you know, he was 101 or is 101, and the buddies that he worked with are all gone. So I mean, there's
Yeah.
a lot of psychological kind of dynamics to some of these conversations that I think you don't really think of. You just have the
Mm-hmm.
conversation, but the more I do it, the more I realize it really is tapping into something a lot deeper than I originally thought.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that we just don't think about the fact that, as there is loss in life. You lose your family, your friends, they move away, they pass away, but your need to connect is still there, and so I think that, yeah, as you pointed earlier, COVID really pushed this, triggered this realization, like, oh wow, people are really lonely, they need to connect. Um, but this does it in a more, I don't know. I think it's nice that you have tailgate for Roman numeral for joy, which is the joy aspect of it. That this is joyful. I mean, yeah, there's a certain wistfulness about it. It's true, but the ability for people to do this, I think, is really important to them. Any other? You mentioned this guy from General Mills. Any other stories that have surprised you or just sort of stuck with you? That
Yeah, I
it's hard.
mean,
You've done so many. I know it's hard.
yeah, I think let me answer kind of both specifically and generically. Specifically, I've talked to a handful of World War II vets
Mm-hmm.
and those stories are just fascinating. But just a couple months ago, I'm talking about the documentaries that we do are very planned, and there's a real, there's a whole story that we're putting together and plotting, and that's a very structured process. The Vintage Voices 100-year-old visits, you just show up, you don't know what's going to happen.
Right.
But anyway, so I've had a lot of a lot of the World War II vets, and all of a sudden, a couple months ago, a guy gets in just a thick German accent,
Mm-hmm.
and he grew up in Germany as a
Mm-hmm.
kid, and he had to spend 30 minutes every morning singing praise songs to Hitler,
Wow.
and then and that at night he's running between his house and a bomb shelter, right in the middle of everything. But you
Wow.
think about that stuff, I think you think about that as being ancient history,
Mm-hmm.
and then you're
Mm-hmm.
just sitting, in the car right next to somebody, you each got your cup of coffee, and it's a person that just lived it. So I
Mm-hmm.
think that there's, it's almost like, it's I could spend, 14 of your episodes talking about the individual stories.
Mm-hmm.
There just is, it's just fascinating to me, the resiliency that people had. 75% of the people that we talked to grew up with no power, with
Mm.
no
Right.
electricity,
Right.
half the time no running water, bathrooms outside if it's a rural area. And the one thing they all have in common is nobody complained. There's not one iota of complaining about it.
Right.
So I mean,
Right.
my tolerance. I mean, this is
Uh,
like my tolerance level of young people complaining about stuff is extremely
Low.
shallow. Yeah, yeah. So but I do. Honestly, Ron, I go to bed at night. I can't tell you how the spiritual impact these people have on me, and it just,
Yeah.
I try to really, at the end of the day, just spend some time with the lights out,
Mm-hmm.
and nothing, and just think about who that person was that I talked that day. And it is, it sounds hokey to say it, but it is
No.
such an honor to
Mm-hmm.
capture this. You have somebody's life on an SD card,
Right.
and we do all the social media stuff, and it's getting tens of thousands of followers, and it's got millions of views, and I don't mean to sound flippant, but that is so irrelevant to me. The relevance to me of what we're doing is that you give that family, here's the story, here's
Mm-hmm.
this, we'll edit the SD card, here's the story of your dad's life, your grandpa's
Mm-hmm.
life. And my kids never met my dad,
Mm-hmm.
and you can show a picture, and it's great, but to listen, it's just the honor of doing this, the capturing. And it's happened several times where a person's died, and then we
Yeah.
can we can get for the family, here's the stuff you inevitably didn't know about your mom or dad. So there is a, I think I used this word before, there's a sanctity to all of this,
Mm-hmm.
and a
Mm-hmm.
spirituality to all this that is just, it's hard to convey,
Yeah. Yeah. You miss those opportunities. I think for a lot of us, I after after college, I came back and I spent some time. Well, after graduate school, it was a little bit after, but with my folks, I was working on an entrepreneurial project with one of my brothers, and you know, at first, you're like, oh, here I am back home, my parents, but now you're both adults, and interestingly, in some ways, the time was too short because I realized, well, now I can really talk to my dad, and I
yeah.
remember, you know, inviting him to lunch one day and saying, why did you make that decision? Why did you decide to drop out of law school? And he was at Harvard Law School. Why did you decide? So things that, that we miss because we're such a mobile society. We're a society of movers, and we just keep moving and moving. We don't get that time to connect, and so this is an interesting venture of yours. I really appreciate the fact that.
What's something you found out about your dad that you had no idea?
Well, I had no idea his father was a lawyer, a very successful lawyer, and he could have been a lawyer. So what I found out, I said, why didn't you want to go to law school? What bothered you about the law? Because he's like your dad. He turned out to be an engineer, and so he said, well, I didn't like the fact that as a lawyer you could argue two sides of the issue, one side and then the next. He said like either one side is right or not. That's his engineering mind. So he didn't
Yeah.
like that kind of what to him was a sense of hypocrisy, in the profession. So, but that he had never really, I never really asked him about that, like why, it made a lot of sense, 'cause knowing my dad's had a real sense, a deep ethical sense of fairness in life, you know. So if it weren't for that lunch, though, I don't think I really would have been able to
Yeah, yeah.
capture that.
Well, and the other thing too is like you're in your, not that this is a bad thing. It's just reality. I think you in your teens and 20s, you're kind of in your own head.
Right.
You're trying to figure out your own stuff. So you don't think about the reflectiveness that you think about when for me in kind of mid 60s. I do it. This kind of was not planned at all, but it's so relevant is that we have the van I drive around in, this whole Vintage Voices 100-year-old van I drive around. It's all wrapped, and there's a great picture of my dad in World War II, and it's like right where the gas cap is. It's like every time I get gas, I'm like having a little silent, hey, what's going on, Dad? It's
Right.
like a
Right.
whole little connection that we have. But that, yeah, I mean, it is. I think, a takeaway from this for people is that it's a cliche, but just go. It's so easy with GoPro. There's so many ways to film things
Mm-hmm.
that there's just no excuse not to do it. And you
Right.
just while your parents or even your kids, just take time to slow down and capture stuff, and you never regret it.
Yeah. So we're just like one more quick break. I still want to get into quite a bit of that stuff with you, but we'll get in as much as we can. So, folks, we're going to take one more quick break, but don't go away because we have a lot more to talk about in our last segment with Jack York, the founder of Tailgate. So don't go anywhere.
Caring for a loved one can feel overwhelming. That's why we created caregivingnav.com, your personal guide through the complex world of caregiving. It's a free interactive website built around the Caregiving Navigator book, with tools designed to make your journey easier. Whether you're planning ahead, managing care right now, or navigating a crisis, you'll find step-by-step advice, trusted resources, and over a dozen downloadable checklists. From legal planning to home safety, from medical decisions to emotional support, it's all here, all in one place. Just visit caregivingnav.com because you're not alone on this path, and the help you need is just a click away.
Welcome back, folks, to 45 Forward, where we're talking today with Jack York. We've been covering a lot of territory about how he has gathered and disseminated the stories of America's seniors. Terrific stories, very interesting. And we're going to now just talk about, his Vintage Voices project talks about the lives of centenarians, 100-year-olds, and he had some interesting observations about, because everyone says like, oh, well, what are the secrets to living so long? And you had some interesting observations that had nothing to do with food and diet.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, the one thing too, I think this is like a good for your listeners, a good trivia bar statistic is that there's more people, more centenarians, more people over 100 now than in the history of the world
Wow.
combined. So that, I mean, that is a crazy. So it's definitely, and it's just with all the medical advances, obviously, it's not as much of a novelty as before. We talked a little bit about this before, that it's and there's really, you look at something, like the blue zone. There's all that,
Right.
I don't want to pretend to be a researcher. All I'm talking about is just the anecdotal
Right.
stuff I've seen. But there has been no consistency at all when it comes to diet, when it comes to, do you drink or not? And there's people that have not had a drink ever. There's somebody else that, at 9 in the morning has a glass of bourbon
Right.
every day. Like, there's no consistency to that. But the things that have been consistent are, I mean, faith has been like 95%
Oh,
consistent,
interesting.
that people having a very strong connection, with God, with, whatever their God
Right.
is. A few people have been, just kind of vehemently not, but that's still about 95%. What's been 100% consistent, and it's interesting, it's almost a couple things. One of is, it's almost a feistiness
Mm-hmm.
of people, obviously anybody over 100, most of them are going to have some kind of physical issues, and so there are some things they need help with, but they begrudgingly take that help. They
Mm.
do, and it's interesting because I think a lot of mindset, for good reason, whether is an individual or a senior living community, is you try to do everything for
Mm-hmm.
people. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that I walk away from this thinking that's probably not the right answer, because people still, they still want to try to use their utensils. They still want to try to walk as much as they can. So that was one thing. Another thing is just very few people that I've interviewed over 100 are sitting around watching television. There is a thirst there's a
Mm-hmm.
curiosity that stays there. People asking me about the cameras, and what are we doing with all this stuff, and it really is, that has been very interesting. And the last thing, and this has been a great thing for me to look at in my mid 60s, is just movement, just very intentional people trying to move, realize, not heavy exercise, not, some people do heavy exercise, but but people just intentionally trying to walk as much as they can, and have consistent movement. But those three things have been pretty consistent. But the personalities, I have, I'll just say a couple things. Like,
Yeah.
you kind of have this this sense of puritanism that, is not really relevant. But there was one guy that was 90, he was 102, and he was talking about his wife died when he was
Wow.
75. And so I was like, that must have been hard. How did you, no, excuse me, 85. His wife time was 85. I was like, well, how did you, it must have been hard, how did you deal with that? What was your, what was it like? And he was like, well, luckily 6 months later, I met a short redhead, and she was a sexual dynamo. And so this is like a guy at 85. So I think that
Yeah.
I think the reason the channel is popular, this I have no research on this, it's just kind of
Mm-hmm.
intuitive, that Dash Media and our friend Nathan Jones, who does all the analytics, most of the people that watch it, and it's been millions and millions of views this stuff has had,
Mm-hmm.
are people like between 45 and 65. And I think it's showing their 80-year-old parents that are feeling like they should check out, that, mom, look at this lady that's 20 years older than you are, and is just kicking butt. And I
Mm-hmm.
think,
Mm-hmm.
for your audience, Ron, that is so relevant. I think that how it's relevant, how irrelevant the number of an age
Mm-hmm.
is, because you'll just see people that
Right.
are super frail at 60 something, and somebody just going crazy at
Yeah.
105. And so it really, it's a joy to keep finding these people, and to just see, what they're going to say. And like I said before, it's not, the stories don't have to be about dramatic things they've done. There's there's a there's a beauty to the more simplistic people that have just lived good
Mm-hmm.
lives, and are proud of those good
Yeah.
lives.
Yeah, you've talked to me about, there's just a quiet dignity about a lot of these people that you, um, And a lot of them, as you mentioned, going back to World War II, especially these veterans, that you can sense that in them. But in general, I think a lot of people, there is that, you get more comfortable with yourself as you get older
Yeah, and
about
there,
who you are.
yeah, and I just again a little off topic, but I want to not regret that I didn't bring this up. There really is an intensity of
Mm.
loneliness throughout the communities, and I really do. The one thing I'm really trying to preach as I speak and as I talk to a lot of people that run senior living communities is to tie in with local high schools. Because like the one quick
Right,
story that
sure.
speaks to that is a gentleman that was, he's 101, he's kind of frail in his walker, going up to the van. He gets into the van, we start talking. The guy had a silver star from World War
Mm-hmm.
II for jumping out of a plane that was flying about 100 feet over the water to rescue two British pilots that had
Mm-hmm.
crashed. And like you hear that story, and the guy instantly is not this frail guy in a walker.
Right.
He's the guy that jumped out of a freaking plane to do that. And so I went to his house later that day. He had all of the stuff there to show me. He was so thirsty to tell it and show it. He'd lived at the community for 10 years. I drive out of the parking lot at the end of the afternoon. It's right across the street from a high school.
Wow.
How many classes have graduated
Wow.
talking about World War II, talking about the Korean War, talking about Vietnam, and right across the street are these people that are so thirsty to tell their experiences. And so I just think that I think it's easy to get caught up in the enormity of big picture issues. It's not difficult to forge a partnership between a senior living community and a high school to just have their history classes start integrating residents to tell that's things that people can just do.
Yeah. And I think that's, there's much more engagement, much more sense of meaning.
Yeah.
Nothing wrong with going to having, elementary or kids go and visit a senior living community or a senior center and share, with the seniors. But the sharing of those experiences, I think that's it's not just, being there and
Yeah,
alleviating
yeah,
loneliness.
and it's a whole other topic, but I think of the importance of a
Right,
relationship rather than kind of a one and done
right,
experience.
right. So before we go, I want to make sure that we tell people how to get in touch with you and to, how to watch the videos and all the contact information. But before that, I just want to know what's next for you now. So you mentioned that you're going around and you're still doing your lecturing. You want to do other things.
Yeah, well,
What's your
we're gonna. I mean, it really is. I mean, my life is insane schedule wise. So we're gonna wrap up the Vintage Voices tour at the end of the
okay?
year, and then next year I'm really gonna be focused. So we're gonna still be showing some of the content, but next year I'm really gonna be focusing on doing these kind of deeper dive
Okay.
documentaries that are all about aging, and they're all, I'm not trying to make political state. It's all about elevating aging. It's all
Mm-hmm.
about stories of people that either live in senior living, people that work in senior living, but really elevating all these stories that need to be told in a really professional, well done way. And we've done dozens of them so far. You can see them at our website is www.tailgate4joy.com, TALEGATE 4joy.com. And then I really enjoy speaking, all over the country to, a lot of what I'm speaking is to senior living organizations, but I'm trying to kind of branch out of that. I'll still keep doing
Mm-hmm.
that, but I really want to kind of get out to the community at large about these lessons I've
Mm-hmm.
learned, and in my own, however I can do it myself, and through the work we've done, just really just kind of help change the stigma of aging,
Mm-hmm.
and for
Mm-hmm.
both for the older adults themselves, but also for the people that have all these fears and stereotypes and all this stuff that I don't think is
Mm-hmm.
changed through anti-aging week or all these things that are well intentioned. I think it's, you watch the story of somebody that's really made an impact, and it makes you not so fearful, I think, of growing old.
Right.
And I think the work you're doing, Ron, speaks
Yeah.
exactly to that as
Yeah.
well.
Great. So, Jack, if people want to get in touch with you, can I give them your email, or
Oh
you
yeah,
have a?
email 100%. We love to be getting folks following the Vintage
Okay.
Voices tour. That's just Vintage Voices 100
Okay.
on Instagram
Great.
or YouTube or Facebook, TikTok, whatever. And then yeah, email me, and if you've got, I, I'm I'm working my way throughout the whole, from kind of the Carolinas up through the Northeast, through the upper Midwest, ending up in California. If somebody's that hears this has a great 100-year-old, I can't guarantee it, but reach out to me, and if there's a way to swing my van around and grab the story, I'll do it.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And you're on LinkedIn and Facebook, and you've got lots of interesting posts there. And then they can watch your reels, which I've done. So that's a
Yeah,
great
yeah,
way to
yeah.
get a taste for all the stuff you've done. So I encourage people to go on that, because they are joyful. You do come away with a sense of gratitude and joy. So thanks very much, Jack. It was a great hour to talk with you. I really appreciate the terrific conversation, provoking thoughts in myself about my aging, and my overall mantra, which is to help people age successfully, whatever that means. But basically to do it with a not ignoring the challenges we have, but also appreciating the lifelong growth. The life loop. So
Yeah, that's right.
so
Yeah.
again.
All right, thanks, Ryan. Great work you're doing as well, and I'm honored to be on your show.
Right. So, folks, if you have questions for me, you want to get in touch with me, I'm ron.rowell@gmail.com. Send me your comments or questions. So, until our next episode, keep moving forward, 45 forward.